Calgary. But before we begin, we wanted to acknowledge that even though we're meeting on a virtual platform today, we want to acknowledge the importance of the land, which we each call home. So from coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So before we begin with our webinar talk today, we're going to do a very, very quick advertisement for our new class notes journal, which our web administrator is going to be putting on the screen in just a moment for us. So here, hopefully you can see our call for papers. So we are launching class notes in spring 2021. Our research director, Alec McClellan, has been working on this, but he's not able to join us today. So we are going to be looking for two different types of publications. We're going to be looking for articles. So this is going to be great for those of you that have some initial results that you'd like to share with us, or fantastic for student papers as well. And we're also looking for field notes. So these are really short papers, much more personal, and a chance for you to share your experiences from excavations or field schools or lab work. So we have templates on our website that are available, and everything can be submitted electronically. So we're asking everything to be sent in for February 19th so that we can put forward the publication for the spring. And if you have any questions, you can email us. And so this is available for our members. So membership is only $10 a year. And we are also going to be emailing this out to all of our members very shortly as well. So we look forward to your submissions. And so without any further ado, I'm going to be passing over to Matt, who's going to be introducing our speaker for today.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased today to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Paris, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology at the University of Calgary, where she teaches classes in archaeology, lithics, zooarchaeology, Mesoamerica, and urbanism. Dr. Paris received her BA in anthropology from the University of Colorado Boulder and her MA and PhD in anthropology from the University at Albany State University in New York. Her research focuses on ancient Mesoamerica, exploring issues of economic organization, commercial exchange, high-skill crafts, household wealth, archaeometallurgy, and issues of surveillance and sustainability in ancient Maya cities. She directs archaeological projects in Highland Chiapas in Mexico, including her current project, the Economic Networks of Tenampuente Project, which she co-directs with Dr. Roberto Lopez Bravo and Gabriel Lalo Jacinto. Additionally, she has participated in archaeological investigations at sites in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, Belize, Spain, and Italy. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce a colleague at the University of Calgary, Dr. Elizabeth Paris.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate the introduction, and thank you all for having me today or whenever you may be listening to this talk. I am very pleased to present the making of a marketplace at Tenampuente, Chiapas, together with my co-authors and project co-directors, Roberto Lopez Bravo from the Universidad de Ciencias y Artes de Chiapas, and Gabriel Lalo Jacinto of INA Chiapas. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Treaty 7 lands, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and Tsuut'ina First Nation, and would like to also acknowledge that the city of Calgary is home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I'd also like to acknowledge that Tenampuente is located on the traditional lands of the Toholabal Maya. So to give you a bit of a background and an introduction to Tenampuente and the region where it's located, Tenampuente is a Maya cultural site. It's located in Mesoamerica, so the area of central Mexico, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and the Yucatan Peninsula that you see highlighted on the map here, specifically within the Maya cultural area, which is more or less this area that's shaded in the darker green here. Within this region, Tenampuente is located in the modern country of Mexico and state of Chiapas, and it's located here not too far from the modern border with Guatemala. The site is very interesting in terms of its location. It's on the eastern edge of what's known as the Central Highlands of Chiapas, as you can see. So it is at the nexus of a lot of cultural and ecological zones on a linguistic border, not too far from the modern division between Maya and non-Maya speaking peoples. So it has a lot of a role to play in ancient trade and transportation routes. It's within Highland Chiapas, but it's also very close to the Central Depression of Chiapas, a historically important riverine transportation route, and then to the east and south with the Cuchumatanes Mountains and Highland Guatemala, and then to the north and east, the southern lowlands. So within that region specifically, Tenampuente is located on the southeast edge of the Comitan Plateau, which you can see in this picture, hopefully forms this beautiful open plateau landscape that is, again, right at the nexus of the highlands and the lowlands, and was very important as part of that Western Maya frontier. Particularly during the period I'll be talking about, the late classic to early post-classic transition, or approximately AD 700 to 1100. More broadly within this talk, I'm situating this talk thematically and theoretically within a discussion of plazas in ancient Mesoamerica and their history of development over time. Now, when you see a picture like the one I've got on the right of the Plaza F East from Tenampuente, usually plazas appear to the modern viewer as these beautiful open sports arena, perhaps open field like natural areas. In point of fact, they are anything but natural. They're very carefully constructed. There's absolutely nothing natural about this space. It is a constructed landscape that was built very carefully over a long period of time, and this is actually typical of Mesoamerican plazas. They're carefully constructed built environments that were built and changed over time for specific purposes that shifted according to the desires of rulers and architects and engineers to create these specific places for specific activities. And usually those people had kind of an imagined community of what they thought would be happening in those spaces and what they thought would be enacted there, whether or not that was actually true historically. You know, we can see examples where it was and where it wasn't, but they had an idea in mind. And scholars such as Dr. Takashi Inamata have argued that plazas were very important in contributing to the development of community cohesion, and particularly his recent work at the site of Aguada Phoenix, a very important formative period site located in Tabasco, just to the north of the area what we're talking about today, shows that these monumental plaza spaces were very important in the development of Mesoamerican community and the negotiation of power relationships between people and their emerging rulers. And as I mentioned, the plaza use could change over time. So what might have been politically relevant or important for creating community in one time period might not have been eternally true. And it's very common actually in ancient Mesoamerican plazas that the plaza could be expanded in size, that previously important monuments such as stela or altars could be added to a plaza, or in some cases removed from view, from service, could be in some cases removed to be included in other monumental constructions, or sometimes maybe removed with a bit of force if people decided they didn't like the political regime that much. We can also talk about different types of plazas. So we'll be talking today about multi-purpose plazas and also special purpose plazas, but maybe they were multi-use, but they were usually built and designed with a specific objective in mind. And then one thing that we'll be talking about less today, but is still important to recognize, is that you also had private plaza spaces. We generally in Mesoamerica don't even call these plazas, we call them patios. But again, they're open spaces for either a large extended family or perhaps within the context of a palace where people could congregate, gather, and interact. So when we're talking about activities in multi-use plazas in ancient Mesoamerica, it's important to recognize that there are a lot of different activities that can go on, but scholars Dr. Alana Osa, Michael Smith, and Jose Lobo have defined a few that seem to be particularly important across Mesoamerica through time. And these are not tightly defined categories. A lot of different activities might have engaged one or more of these categories. This is just a useful heuristic device that we can understand activities in the marketplace within a bit of a framework and compare them between regions and sites. So first of all, we have private rituals. So within the Maya area specifically, these could include things like bloodletting ceremonies or incense burning or ritual scattering. But the idea is that there were some ceremonies that might have been just for example, members of the royal family or members of a royal court, right, that were slightly restricted in nature. You could also have periodic markets. And this is something that we see, especially in modern Mesoamerica. You will often have temporary marketplaces that emerge in plaza spaces that are often multi-use plazas. You can go to, I would say, most Mesoamerican cities today and see these in action. They're often called tianguis, which comes from the Nahuatl word of tianguistli. And that is just a general term for an open air market that is held on a rotating basis, sometimes every week, sometimes historically every 5 days. But the idea was often that multiple cities or towns within a specific area would alternate market days, giving vendors and perhaps customers a chance to circulate from market to market depending on what was being offered and what they wanted to sell or buy. You could also have mass spectator ceremonies. So these would be affairs of state, maybe royal ceremonies, where a very large crowd, maybe the population of an entire city or a polity, could gather in one space and witness particular events. These could be maybe an accession ceremony or maybe a public sacrifice that was happening. Another very closely related category is participatory public ceremonies. And these could be things like processions or dances, offerings of incense that somehow involved the crowd in an active way. And finally, you could have feasting. So these could be a small number of people, a large number of people, but archaeologically, we often find these in terms of special purpose middens. They're often left perhaps in a corner of the plaza. And usually you find things like smashed ceramics, food remains, and soil chemistry residues. We can also talk about special purpose marketplace plazas. And this is something that archaeologists are increasingly identifying within Mesoamerica more broadly, and particularly in the Maya area. Now, marketplace plazas are described extensively in Spanish contact period documents, but until recently, a lot of scholars either weren't looking for them or perhaps in some cases didn't think that they existed. But from the ethnohistorical records, we actually have quite detailed descriptions of marketplaces in the Maya area and beyond. Perhaps the best described is actually the central marketplace of the Aztec capital, the Mercado de Tlatelolco, which is described extensively in sources such as the Florentine Codex and famously depicted by artist Diego Rivera in a mural. So in terms of looking for special purpose marketplace plazas in the archaeological record, there are a number of features that have emerged through study that archaeologists are beginning to look for. First of all, special purpose marketplaces are often located in large side plazas. So while there might have been a temporary marketplace or tianguis that could have happened in a main plaza, a special purpose permanent or semi-permanent marketplace might have been located in an area perhaps right next to the main plaza or a little bit further removed, or in some cases, scholars are beginning to identify smaller plazas in neighborhoods, such as the work by Armando Anaya and colleagues, or the work of the Chases at Caracol, where they've identified plazas in the causeway termini at the city. You can also have a lot of variation in how ancient marketplaces look. They're not on a standard plan. So for example, you could have relatively open marketplace spaces. And in some cases, you might have permanent stalls that are created from masonry. You might have perishable stalls that are created from wattle and daub or some other kind of material, or you might even just have temporary stalls, which could be a small awning held up by a support system, or perhaps even just a blanket on the ground, as you see in many markets of Highland Chiapas today. Often, with that being said, within the market space, vendors will tend to arrange themselves in rows so that the customers can come and circulate between the rows back and forth. So in the archaeological record, we look for distributions of artifacts that are in rows, and then similarly evidence of soil chemistry that's distributed in rows, particularly traces of evidence from food vendors. So phosphates and phosphorus in the soil. You also then have marketplaces being periodically swept clean. As much as contact period writers tended to complain about marketplaces being busy and dirty, over time, people would have wanted to keep their marketplace spaces relatively clean. And so a lot of times they are swept clean, and you find distinctive middens that are either along the edges of the marketplace or maybe a special purpose midden dump that is just outside of an enclosed marketplace when there are specific walls that are delineating the space. So what did those look like? Well, we have a lot of examples that have been published. Open and semi-enclosed plaza market spaces have been identified at a number of sites, including Buena Vista del Cayo, Trinidad de Nosotros, and Mayapan, so spanning the late Classic to the late post-Classic period. And you can see that a lot of these spaces do have some structures that are defining this space as a plaza, but it's very open. There's no restrictions on movement or access, and people can more or less come and go as they please. You can also have enclosed marketplaces. So here are some examples from Yashnoka, a single marketplace and a double marketplace, where the access points really are restricted in some ways and might be along one side of the marketplace or just at specific corners. And similar aspects have been identified at Chungchukmil, which is in the northern Yucatan, where you have these sock bays or raised roads, which are often procession ways, and these could lead in from the outlying neighborhoods into the city center or between different areas within the center. But in this particular case, they are being used to define the marketplace on three sides, and then you have a large platform that's defining the fourth side, but the fourth side is relatively open. So in this case, the sock bays would also perhaps have facilitated people who are traveling to the market, but they also serve to delineate the space in a really specific area. And then perhaps the most enclosed example of an enclosed marketplace within this group is Mashna, where you again have these very large temples and long structures that are defining the plaza edges, and you really have access at the corners that's restricted there. And then perhaps the most formal examples where you not only have delineating walls, but delineating stalls. Tikal perhaps is the most famous example, where you have these long gallery complexes, which have been interpreted as stalls. And then similarly at Calakmul, perhaps the two largest and most politically dominant of the Southern Lowland political capitals, you similarly have this arrangement where you have these long linear arrangements of structures in a way that looks very much like stalls. So we also then have depictions of merchants and vendors in artwork to accompany these. And specifically from the site of Calakmul, we have the Cheeknob murals, which date from approximately AD 620 to 700. And archaeologists have actually argued that marketplace exchange may go significantly further back in history beyond the late classic period, but as of this date, there's not a lot of artistic expression of what merchants and vendors might look like. And in fact, within the corpus of Maya art in general, there seems to be less inclination to depict everyday activities such as marketplace vending and merchants, but they are there. And if you start to look for them, you see them. For example, we have a depiction of a woman who's vending a tole. The glyphs above her say a tole person. And in fact, within the mural corpus of the Chicna more broadly, you have other people vending other things. You have the salt person and the taco person. So this implies that people are vending different commodities, and they're named in the text based on what it is they're vending, and they're often shown together with customers. And in this case, she actually has a little gourd scoop in her hand and appears to be dispensing a liquid, which you could assume is a tole. And you also have a depiction of a merchant. Merchants canonically in Mesoamerican art are often shown with a distinctive staff, which they would take with them on their travels. Similarly, the Aztec Pochteca were described as always carrying these staffs and a tump line with a cargo of their goods on their back, and then also this very distinctive sombrero hat. So we can infer that he's a merchant. He's depicted very similarly to the way that throughout the corpus of Mesoamerican art that we see merchants being depicted. And as far as I know, this is one of the earliest. We also have a lot of information that's encoded in Mayan languages, including the ones that are spoken today. So Tanampuente is located just to the southeast of the modern city of Comitán. And in modern Toholabal, Chonab means city, and it usually refers to Comitán, but it could also refer to another large city in the Comitán Plateau, Las Margaritas. So in this particular instance, Chonab comes from the root word chono, to sell. So this infers that specifically within the area where Tanampuente is located, cities are associated with a place where you go to sell things. And it's usually a very large city. So this links the idea of marketplaces and cities and selling things. We also, in the similar language of Chorti, Chonib means marketplace or plaza. And that's actually very common in a lot of Mayan languages, where the word for marketplace is the same as the word for plaza. So again, linking the ideas of marketplace being held in a plaza. And often the person for a merchant or a vendor, the term is then reflected in that language as well. So in Chorti, you have Chonib, meaning marketplace or plaza, and then Chonib is the person who sells. Similarly, for Yucatec Maya, Kiwik, marketplace or plaza, Kiwik, he who sells. And finally, in Cachiquel in Highland, Guatemala, you have Aibal, meaning marketplace or plaza, and Aibali is the person who sells. So this shows that across a lot of Mayan languages, you have these ideas that are interlinked between marketplace and plaza and a person who sells things. So switching focus to the site of Tanampuente specifically, this is Tanampuente as seen from the overlooking residential hilltop to the south of the site. This is the Acropolis, which has been the focus of the Proyecto Tanampuente for the last 30 years, directed by Gabriel Lalo Jacinto, and has excavated and carefully restored the architecture of the monumental zone, which is encompassed in this hilltop here. And the main plaza that I'll be talking about for the remainder of the talk is located in the saddle at the base of this hilltop. Now, again, like the plaza, there is very little that is natural about this hilltop. It is a beautifully constructed space with these 4 large monumental terraces upon which the temples and the architecture, ball courts, platforms, elite residences, all those things are built into these terraces, which are in turn are built into the natural landscape and the hillside. You can just see the monumental architecture peeking out there. You took this one, the rains had already started, so you see there's a lot of vegetation. But then on the surrounding hilltops like these, you have other outlying residential settlements. And then, as you can see, it's built rather defensively. This is a monumental zone that would have been very difficult to attack. You have a very good view in a lot of different directions. You can see the Comitan Plateau stretching out to the north. You can see the base of the Western Highlands beginning over here. The road, the modern road that goes up to the Amatenango and Teopisca Valley, and finally to the Jovel Valley. And then to the south and east, you get to the Upper Grijalva River Valley. And then behind me in the photo, you get to a small rise and then very quickly descend into the Central Depression. So it would have been very easy for the people of the city to see and perhaps defend the monumental zone and the surrounding residences from all directions. So in 2019, my colleagues and co-authors and I started the Proyecto Las Redes Económicas de Tanampuente. And unfortunately, due to COVID, we've only had a chance to do one season so far, but we hope to do many more. And the project involved students and investigators from the University of Calgary, Universidad de Ciencias y Artes de Chiapas, and INA Chiapas, as well as members of the surrounding community, Ejido Francisco Sarabia. So during the project, we excavated many, many shovel tests throughout the main plaza and also conducted some deep penetrating test excavations to understand not only the last phase of the main plaza, but also its history and how it was constructed. So data from that first season is what I'll be sharing with you today. So here is the main plaza viewed in the form of a topographic map. And as you can see, here's the Acropolis rising above it in the artificial terraces with the temples and ball courts and things up here. And then you also have a great deal of public architecture that is located in the main plaza itself, and then a residential complex located just to the south of the main plaza. So within the main plaza, we can define 3 different zones. Well, I'll be focusing quite a bit on Plaza F West, which is this zone here. This is the area which we have hypothesized is a semi-enclosed marketplace space. As you can see, there are structures delineating all sides of it, although there are different access points between 2 shrines and at the corners, and then principally from the south face of it, where you have the modern access path today, and we also presume that it would have been the principal access for ancient people within the site. If you travel along the main access path coming from the road that leads from the Comitan Plateau and or the Central Depression, if you go the other direction, traveling along that main access path, you reach the Plaza F East, which was the main center of civic life, we argue, and also a space for mass spectacles and gathering. You could fit quite a lot of people in here. Again, it is delineated on all sides to some extent by these structures and by the retaining wall of the Acropolis. And then this is the Acropolis main staircase. So this was a very specific access point, really a very specifically built and defensible staircase that provides access to the upper terraces and religious architecture. And then the principal ball court 1. And then just to the east of that is this very interesting feature called the Sunken Plaza, which we have observed in the rainy season actually serves to drain all of the water from the Acropolis and the main plaza down and out towards the south and east of the site, which we hope to explore further in further seasons. So during our excavations, we focused on Plaza F East and Plaza F West. We excavated almost 300 shovel test pits and also 12 larger test units that were focused on understanding the history of particular structures around both of the plazas and also the history of construction of the plazas. So Plaza F East, as you can see in these photos, here's the ball court, and then you have this very large open area. You can access the Acropolis from this staircase, which I was actually standing on to take this photo. As you can see, it's a fairly specific and narrow space, but in the plaza below, you could fit quite a lot of people. And then also, if you were on the Acropolis stairs, say as a performer or a ruler performing the ritual, you had a very good view of everybody who was in the plaza. So to explore this space, we excavated 56 shovel tests on a 10 by 10 meter grid. So here is Plaza F West. So again, this is defined by these small mounds that were surrounding the plaza and really dividing the space between the east and the west. The last occupational surface of this is actually a surface of very fine gravel. And you actually can't see it because this is currently a eco reserve for bromeliads. So we had to be very careful in terms of modifying the vegetation, and it does make it a bit harder to see in terms of the ancient architecture, but we have a dual commitment to the archaeology and also to the conservation of the space. So I'll show you some other pictures that will hopefully elucidate the nature of the space and the structures in it. So this is the area that we're proposing as an ancient marketplace. And to explore this space, we excavated 222 STPs on a 5 by 5 meter grid, again, looking for traces of soil chemistry and artifact distributions. So here are some of the small mounds that surround the plaza. You could see in some areas we were able to clear off the vegetation just a bit to get an idea of what the surface looked like. And this particular structure, structure 51, is 50 meters long and basically defines the rear side of the marketplace plaza. And then as you can see, the Acropolis retaining wall is right there. So this would have been just in front of the Acropolis retaining wall. And we've hypothesized that it could be an administrative structure for the marketplace. That's one of the structures that we hope to excavate more fully in the next upcoming season. And then dividing the plaza between the east and western portions are two small shrines, and there is a small walkway between them, but the access would have been at the very least open to surveillance. It would have been very notable who was walking between that space. You maybe had room for 2 people abreast, not very much. So it was a very carefully delineated space, even though there are a number of access points from which to enter or exit the plaza. Just going back to the previous map, I'm not sure if you can tell, but the western edge here is very, very steep and drops sharply to the intermontane saddle, which probably again would have been the principal access point from the Comitan Plateau and remains to this day in that function. So really, you do have this structure delineating the western edge, but even if you got back behind the structure, there's not a whole lot of place to go. It drops down very sharply and distinctly to the intermontane area below. And then on the northern edge, also delineating that space, you have that retaining wall. Now, interestingly, you do have this small area here, and we have realized, thanks to Gabriel Lalo Jacinto, that there is a hidden staircase back here that would have allowed access between the Plaza F West rear access and the second level of the Acropolis. So we have hypothesized, perhaps speculated, that this could have been used by state agents to move things like purchased goods or tax payments from the marketplace, perhaps from this administrative structure here, in a rather discreet fashion from that space, and then up the hidden staircase to these more restricted spaces on the second level. And there's actually a small platform here, which we hypothesize was used by perhaps the administrators of the site to make sure that that second level really was authorized personnel only. So we think that this is a very interesting feature in the landscape, and we hope to explore it further in future seasons. So shifting focus a little bit to the construction of this space, I've showed you what it looks like at its latest iteration when the city was abandoned, sort of its last built phase. But the plaza has a very complicated history and I'll turn to that now. So when we excavated our vertical test units into the plaza in 12 different places, we were able to take radiocarbon samples from animal bones that were associated with the different levels. And so that has helped us, together with the construction features, to elucidate the history of the main plaza. So the oldest dates that we have are from AD 421 to 597. We have 3 dates. They all date different areas of the Plaza F East, all date to that period. But we actually don't think that they are from structures in the plaza at that time. We think that what has happened, because they are mixed with dates from this later period, 526 to 643, that what happened during that later period is that nearby residential architecture, probably from that residential zone, was enthusiastically borrowed for midden fill by the people who constructed the first phase of Plaza F East and Ball Court 1. So we think that they're going to these older houses, they're taking the midden refuse and they are dumping it together with the soil to create Plaza F East. And as you can see, there's very little masonry fill. It's soil almost all the way down. You have a little bit of caliche, which is eroded limestone, sort of a powdery, gravelly limestone, but really there's not a lot of masonry in the lower levels, really until you hit this surface, which we're calling gravel surface 2. So this suggests to us that during that early phase, you have perhaps cooperation, perhaps some of the founding families of Tenampuente who are contributing middens from these older residences and coming together to build this plaza space. You also have the construction of a platform, Monument 22, which I will talk about in just a second. It's very important. We think that was also built during this early phase. Now, we can't put an exact calendar date on when the ball court was constructed, unfortunately, but we do have a ball court marker from La Esperanza, which is not too far from Chincoteague. And in fact, this ball court marker is often erroneously called the Chincoteague ball court marker. But La Esperanza was a contemporaneous middle to late classic period site, and this ball court marker was dedicated at AD 591. So we've speculated that perhaps the ball court was built around that time, perhaps that there was a flurry of ball court building activity in the region in and around that time period. We, again, can't say for sure, but it works out in terms of the radiocarbon dates that we have. So this is the Monument 22 platform. I'm actually not sure if you can see that because I think my face is covering it up. I'm just going to try and zoom out really quickly and see if I can get it over on the screen so that y'all can see it. But you actually have this very, very long platform that is almost 8 meters long. And we think that it would have been square originally, 8 by 8 meters. And this was erected in Plaza F East, but in the western portion, so to the west of the ball court. And there was a stela on top of it, which by the time the site was abandoned had been toppled over, and at some point it became incredibly broken. Unfortunately, it doesn't look very nice today, but that's the stela that we assume was in the center of this platform. Also, more midden fill from the middle classic period residences was used in this construction. You can see them below here, and the bottom of the platform, so the lower case of masonry, is approximately at the level of where the soil stops. So we think that, you know, they created the plaza, then they placed the platform on top of that soil layer. So we have a lot of artifacts that were in the fill that we can associate with early ritual activity, possibly private rituals, possibly semi-public or participatory ceremonies associated with this platform. We have some late classic period incense burner fragments. We have an effigy bone stingray spine, which is kind of interesting because actually there are other real stingray spines that were imported to the site that are from actual stingrays, and this appears to be carved out of a white-tailed deer bone. We're really not sure why, but it's very interesting. So this is, again, associating ritual bloodletting, ritual behavior with this platform. And then later, which I'll come to in a bit, it was completely buried by this layer of fill here. So we'll come back to that in a second. At some point later than AD 591, Ball Court 1 was heavily renovated. The original phase of Ball Court 1 was constructed by these large rectangular travertine blocks in a technique that my colleague Lalo has called pukton. So it's a very distinctive architectural style. And then sometime after that, Ball Court 1 gets renovated using another technique called sillares. And sillares are these faced limestone blocks from a gray, dense limestone, and they have a tapered posterior end that sticks into either fill or soil or some other thing, but it creates this beautiful veneer masonry that you see all over the site today. And this was used not only to renovate Ball Court 1, but it was used in a lot of the construction of the structures around Plaza F East and West during this period, and also to construct and or renovate a lot of the structures, including temples, including monumental staircases, including residences that are up on the Acropolis. So this was a major construction event, or rather probably a series of construction events that were done in this particular style. And this style is particular not just to Tenampuente, but generally in the Eastern Highlands at sites like Chincoteague. So in addition to this massive Ball Court 1 facelift, they also constructed a few new structures, and that includes this structure here. It's a little hard to see in the photo, but this is the south wall of an attendant house for the Ball Court. And just off the photo to my right, the east, is a sweat bath. In Toholabal, they are called Ika. You might know them by the Nahuatl name Temazcali or Temazcal. And based on the dates that we have above this plaza fill, which I'll get to in a second, we also have a date from AD 655 to 778. So this gives us an idea of the time frame in which this renovation occurred. And another interesting aspect is that the Ball Court was renovated in a couple different phases. We don't have dates on all of them, but the northern edge of the Ball Court used to extend approximately 15 meters to the north. And we're not entirely sure why. It probably would have formed a staircase extension kind of like this. And it extended as far as this corner and then turned approximately 90 degrees. And that created sort of an enclosure, almost a square enclosure. And later on, that was completely filled with gravel and created this nice flat platform space. So there were a lot of different renovations that happened, especially on the north end of the Ball Court, but also on the southern end of the Ball Court in a couple different phases, but associating with this general time period, sort of end of the 7th century, beginning of the 8th century. In addition to that, as if that weren't enough, there was a massive filling event of Plaza F East. So as you can see, it used to be this surface here, mostly soil, carefully packed, tamped earth from that early middle classic midden fill. But again, during this time period, sometime after AD 655, the entire Plaza F East got filled with a series of cobbles and finally this smaller gravel on top. And these two layers form a huge surface over the entirety of Plaza F East. It would have been a massive construction effort, and it mostly buried the Monument 22 platform, making it approximately coeval with the ground surface at that time. Now, one of the interesting things this does is remember how big that platform is. This would have allowed a lot more people to be in the main plaza space. The space that would have otherwise been taken up by that large platform now is coeval with the ground surface. Now people can get, number one, a lot closer to the stela, but they can also circulate a little bit more easily throughout the space. And Plaza F West it is a different construction story entirely. When we started to excavate Plaza F West, we realized very quickly that we were dealing with an entirely different construction technique. Instead of these carefully constructed packed soil layers, we found this massive fill, starting with very large ballast fill on the bottom and then grading up to smaller gravel on the top. And this goes down, we estimate approximately 6 meters in some of the areas in the West Plaza, and then slowly building into what we assume would have been the previous slope leading up to Plaza F East prior to its construction. As you can see, this is basically quarry fill. There's almost no soil, and in fact, it became very hazardous at a certain depth to continue to excavate. So we actually did not hit bedrock for safety reasons. But as you can see, again, very little soil, very loosely packed, quarried limestone fill. And we have a date on approximately when this happened, and it's actually pretty close to the dates that we have for the renovations of Ball Court 1 and Plaza F East, which is this range between AD 667 and 777. And that is from a midden on the west edge just behind structure 49. So this was built very quickly, we think. Built sort of in a rush. They obviously didn't have a lot of access to household middens at that point, and we estimate a construction volume of over 32,000 cubic meters of fill for this area, at least. And that's not even counting the renovations to Plaza F East or the Ball Court. That's just Plaza F West and the entire creation of a massive artificial terrace for this marketplace. If you're listening from Mexico, that's approximately 4,600 camiones de volteo. So it's a lot of construction fill. And we still don't know what quarry it's coming from or how far away it's coming from. But we suspect that this was created through either some sort of corvée labor tax or possibly even coerced labor. We're not sure. We do know that the marketplace continued to be used throughout the 8th and 9th centuries. We have an animal bone from level 1 of that same midden that dates to AD 763 to AD 889. So, and we think it probably continued in use after that, actually. So here's what we get for the final surface across all of Plaza F, and it's actually pretty standardized across both areas. We have the larger cobbles below, then we have this layer of intermediate cobbles, and then finally in the places where it's preserved, we have the small gravel on top. And we think there might have even been a tamped earth surface on top of that, but there was some tractor farming in the 20th century. We think that might have gotten removed, but we find this gravel in enough places across both plazas that we think that's what's happening. So it was a massive construction effort, is my point. In addition, we know that they are also harvesting river gravel out of nearby arroyos and stream beds. And the reason we know that is this interesting artifact. It's an archaic period stemmed and barbed point. We've published an article on it last year. And it was so eroded and has such a heavy patina on it that at first we didn't realize what it was. It's actually dark gray chert in the parts that are broken. You can see it doesn't look like that now. It just looks like a limestone chip, but here's a more complete one from San Cristobal de las Casas. It's only the second reported one from the entire state of Chiapas, as far as we know. And it was chucked into the fill right below this little Laja pavement right at the base of the Acropolis stairs. So in addition to that quarry fill, they're just kind of chucking things into the fill from basically any source that they can, as far as we can tell. So again, I want to emphasize this is a massive, massive shift in construction technique in terms of the amount of labor that went into creating all of these spaces in their final appearance. And so you had a lot of changes happening. You have the renovation of the ball court. First, a northern extension gets put on, then it gets filled in. You have this massive stela platform that gets basically buried up to the ground surface to create the new ground surface level. You have this massive construction of a new cobble and gravel surface all across Plaza F East. And you basically have the plaza size double between the addition of Plaza F West. So that's and the creation of a central marketplace for the city, which, as far as we can tell, archaeologically they didn't have before. We haven't found any predecessors to the marketplace space. So again, a lot of work done very quickly. And then shortly after that, you also have a new era of monument construction and new temples, new tombs. This particular monument, Monument 1 from Tenampuente, built around AD 790, which depending on which of the dates in that range is more correct, could coincide with either the construction of the marketplace or its continuing use. So this brings us to the question, why make a marketplace? Why then? Why there? Why in that fashion? Well, it's a really interesting time period that we're looking at, AD 667 to 778. So that century is a very high conflict century in the Western Maya region. You have mutual captive taking between Palenque, Tonina, their allies. You have all of these kings at Tonina and Palenque and Yaxchilan engaging in these militaristic campaigns. And then just down the road, Chincoteac also engages in a massive building program sometime around AD 770. They construct a ball court, they construct the upper Acropolis. And again, this is all right before that 9th century political turmoil that happens in the southern lowlands, which many of you might know as the Maya collapse. Interestingly, Tenampuente, as well as Chincoteac and Tonina and some other sites in the region, do not experience political collapse during this period. They remain occupied, they remain politically active, caches are dedicated, monuments are constructed, houses are renovated, things seem kind of normal, actually. And all of these sites remain occupied until at least AD 1100. So this actually suggests that perhaps the renovation of the main plaza space and the addition of the marketplace might have served some important functions within the polity. So one thing that we see is that the main plaza gets enlarged and you can add a lot more people. You can indulge in these mass spectator ceremonies and participatory ceremonies that might have provided a sense of community cohesion during a really politically turbulent time. Additionally, by putting a massive marketplace right in the urban core of the site, that would have done a number of things. It might have attracted new long distance merchants to the site, created more economic opportunities for vendors and producers at the city. It definitely probably would have enriched the ruling class, who could have taxed the marketplace potentially and gained income from that. So we can't say for sure. We will never perfectly know the hearts and minds of the people who built this, but we can definitely see that it is part of a specific type of built environment where people are trying to promote community solidarity and commerce. Now, Tenampuente remained active again into the 9th through 12th centuries. You have continuing use of the marketplace. You have Tohil plumbate being used in the marketplace. We find fragments of it being dedicated into elite tombs. You have the introduction of copper artifacts, rings, gold sheet. You have some buildings getting repaired, some remain occupied. Things kind of seem normal. And the last radiocarbon date that we have from above that final level of gravel is AD 1026 to 1154. So again, that's pretty consistent with what we're seeing across the site. We also have this really interesting feasting deposit, and this gets placed at some point over these little platforms. Well, we think they're platforms. We hope to excavate them in the future. You have a ton of broken ceramics, you have lithics, you have animal bone, and you have this little olive shell, which, as I've talked about in other presentations, is associated with currency. So we still have a lot more to understand about this feasting deposit, but we can see that this is a thing that's happening in the plaza as well, potentially during that later period. We're still waiting on a second set of radiocarbon dates from that midden, but hopefully we'll have those soon. So yeah, we have the currency, the ornaments. It's not the only one. We have a little chip off what we think is a greenstone axe. That is also an important item of currency in the Maya area. These are some examples that we have from Moshvikil in the Western Highlands. So this is another example of that commercial activity late in the site's history. We also have some ritual items. We have the slate mirror back fragment for a pyrite mirror. And actually the source of pyrite is not too far away from Tenampuente. It's near Huehuetenango and Xalá in Highland, Guatemala. So this could be either a ritual item that had come to the site of Tenampuente late in its history, or it could be that this was a point of distribution for important ritual items coming from the Western Guatemala highlands and then distributed through other parts of the Maya area and perhaps beyond. So to sum up in terms of the project as we have it currently and what we hope to do, this project is providing a lot of training and network opportunities for students from not only the University of Calgary, but also UNICACH. We're collaborating, we're creating relationships between our universities and also the Mexican government, involving the local community. We are doing Facebook Live and print interviews with local news organizations in Chiapas, and also doing outreach and knowledge mobilization in Calgary, Canada, including an interview for the CBC. And then of course, we're doing academic talks and conference presentations and webinars like this one. So what do we hope to do for the next season once we can all get back down there, hopefully with less COVID? We would like to investigate the structures around the marketplace, do some horizontal excavations, and also to continue to explore the hidden structures of Plaza F East. And we're also going to do some test excavations in the site's residential zone, see what the impact of the construction of the marketplace was to ordinary people of Tenampuente. We'd also like to do some more drone survey, some 3D photogrammetry, and continue to explore the interesting aspects of surveillance and sustainability in Maya cities. So I'd like to acknowledge, just in wrapping up, the kind permission of the Consejo de Arqueología del INA, our universities who have supported us, our financial support from SSHRC, the Museo Arqueológico de Comitán for their logistical support, and of course, our colleagues, staff, students, and the community members of the Ejido Francisco Sarabia and the city of Comitán de Dominguez, without which this would not be possible. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we actually already had a comment on our Facebook Live from Alan Garcia Jarillo, and they say the city where they live is called, I hope I'm going to pronounce this properly, Tianguistenco. Oh, maybe I'll spell it out for you, referring to this periodical markets. So I'm going to actually spell that for you on on the chat in case I have not quite pronounced that correctly. So hopefully you can see that now, Liz. But they say that's the city where they live, and that it refers to these markets.
That is fantastic. Yeah, it's amazing that commerce in ancient Mesoamerica was downplayed for as long as it was within the academy. And I think if you look at the names of places throughout Mesoamerica and Latin America more broadly, and if you look at the thriving market culture today, you can't help but see it. So thank you for the comment. I appreciate it.
Very interesting. And we also appreciate, Alan, you watching from from overseas. That's fantastic.
Yes.
So we'll obviously we'll open up the Facebook for any other questions that anyone has. We've got quite a few people watching, which is great. One question before we get going, actually, Liz, is maybe this is a bit of self-promotion for you. Are you taking any graduate students on at the moment that might be interested in coming to work with you?
Yes, absolutely. Applications are open, and we have a great team, and we are always looking to add to it. So, you know, applications for the University of Calgary graduate program are due January 15th, but if you're interested, drop me a line.
Fantastic. So yeah, if anyone's interested, then definitely email Liz. It sounds like a really exciting project to be part of, lots and lots of outreach as well, which is wonderful. And while we wait for questions, I guess I had one just listening and thinking about it. You were talking about some of these administrative areas outside of the plaza, and I was wondering, do we have any evidence for officials of marketplaces maybe people that were controlling who could be selling in the market or what was sold in the market? Do you know if we have any evidence for anything like that?
Archaeologically, there is unfortunately quite little, but ethno-historically, there's quite a lot. And we know that there were taxes collected on the local market. We know that there was a group of judges that solved marketplace disputes, even caught forged cacao beans. And they were said to be members of the highest ranking levels of the Pocheca. So, you know, it's hard to, when we go back in time over a millennium, beyond that, well, maybe almost a millennium, you know, depending on when you start the clock, I suppose. I think that is something that we can and should look for. And I think the place that we're going to look for it is in those structures around the marketplace. So again, that's one of the goals of the next season, is to excavate some of those structures. Obviously, we wish we could do all of them, but logistically and from a conservation perspective, we shouldn't. But we definitely would like to target structure 51, that very long 50-meter platform at the back. We think that has great potential for being something that would have housed maybe judges or a judge or tax collectors, or possibly even parts of it being used for storage of payments, things like that. We'll know a whole lot more when we excavate it, but that's something we're really looking forward to. And I think hopefully our example will inspire others to similarly excavate other marketplace platforms and similar structures at other marketplaces, because they are there.
Absolutely. And I'm hearing more and more about marketplaces, as I'm sure everyone is as well. When I was working on my master's at Kakabish, we excavated 2 plaza spaces, and one of them, which similar to yours, it wasn't the main plaza, it was a slightly smaller plaza to the south. It looks like it had some refuse that potentially could have been maybe part of a marketplace, but again, we haven't done any investigations there of it yet. But it's certainly really interesting, all of these telltale signs that we can pick up from research projects like yours, that then we can look to and say, okay, maybe we can take that model and apply it to a different site. So yeah, very exciting.
I think that's one of the great things right now, is that so many people are interested in starting to look for what are the archaeological signatures of these spaces. And the more research that is done, the more that we will find. I'm absolutely convinced of that. It's exciting. It's an exciting time to be doing this kind of research. So fingers crossed that space at Kakabish does turn out to be a market. I'd love to know. I think that would be fantastic.
Really interesting. So we're still waiting on it. I don't see any other questions on here. I've refreshed my browser, I think. I don't know if Matt has seen any, or if Matt has a question.
I don't see any new questions, but I do have one. I've spent, not last summer obviously, but the summer before, a lot of time doing shovel test pits in eastern Belize. And I'm curious if in your shovel test pits, you found any sort of patterns of artifact distributions that might suggest discrete activity areas within the plaza, and if you plan on doing any geochemical analysis on some of the soils you may or may not have collected, similar to some of the other marketplace studies that we've seen.
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you very much for asking it. We did collect soil samples, and the analysis is ongoing. Unfortunately, slightly delayed due to COVID, but we definitely are excited about that and looking forward to the results of the soil geochemistry as soon as that's available. In terms of the artifact distribution, I absolutely can speak to that. It was a bit different, as you might expect, between the 2 plazas. In Plaza F East, we are seeing a lot of associations in terms of artifact concentrations with the Stela platform, that Monument 22 platform. There are massive amounts of artifacts, especially animal bone. We had a large felid tooth, which was very exciting, lots of dog tooth pendants, the effigy stingray spine, figurines, the incense burner fragment, all of these sort of ritual associated kind of objects and things. And then of course the massive feasting deposit. Over in Plaza F West, we had a lot more sort of everyday utilitarian type items. Again, more animal bone, which you would expect if people are preparing and serving animal foods, especially white-tailed deer, of course, ubiquitous. Also a lot of rabbit, interestingly. But then also just a lot of utilitarian ceramics, a lot of lithic debitage, very few finished tools, but a few. We got some obsidian, but I will say that, again, these spaces are being swept. And you can tell there's very few artifacts that are concentrated in sort of the large open areas of the plaza. And that's true for both spaces, actually. But just that on the one side, the types of artifacts that you're finding are a bit different. And then in the feasting deposit, obviously, that's a special thing. But yeah, so I would say, too, that one thing that really helped us in terms of defining the space and sampling the space was that the surface was so incredibly defined and well built. You had this very distinct gravel layer that you would hit. I would say within the first 20 centimeters in Plaza F East, probably again due to the modern farming, less so in Plaza F West. In Plaza F West, there were literally times where we would just have our students and local community members take a little hand broom and just sweep the surface because the gravel was right there. And in fact, it became a little difficult to collect enough soil for a soil test in some places. So I think that speaks to the nature of the carefully constructed space, but also allows us to really define artifacts that are from above the fill and artifacts that are from within the fill. So in terms of just as an archaeologist, I really, really thank the ancient people of Tenampuente for creating such lovely surfaces that we could sample. It was a great experience to be able to just see those surfaces and the construction history. And then of course, go a little bit deeper and understand the changes over time in those spaces. Did that answer your question?
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And we've since had quite a lot of people saying great talk, greetings, hello. So you can take a look at the Facebook comments. So we do have a question from Eric Zahn. He asks, are you going to excavate at residential structures outside the marketplace?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your question. We had planned to do that last season. It will be now next season. We were really hoping that the 2020 season would be full of excavations of residential areas and also the structure around the marketplace. It will still happen as soon as we can get there and do it. That is a very important question, actually, in terms of tying the marketplace and the commercial activity that we hypothesized was happening there to the broader city, to the ordinary people who are living in the space. And we hypothesized that that particular area just south of the main plaza is going to be very important for us in terms of understanding the degree to which the marketplace actually impacted everyday people's lives at the site, how much they might have been able to take advantage of new opportunities to get their hands on maybe some non-local goods, some obsidian, some greenstone, other things that they might have wanted, been obtaining through long distance merchants, or whether the members of the ruling class up on the Acropolis were able to sort of siphon things off and not engage the ordinary people of the site quite as much as we might think, or we might even hope. But we'll see. We're excited to find out. Our plan is to target residential middens and ordinary people's everyday household trash and see what they're doing, see how they're living their lives, and see how much that's engaging with the marketplace, either on the production end or the consumption end.
Fantastic. So good luck with those excavations.
Thank
great.
you. We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of archaeologists are so eager to get back to the field. So
yes.
So we don't have any more questions. So I think that will let you get back to your day. And thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today and offering your talk and sharing this wonderful research with us. We really, really appreciate it. Oh, Eric says thanks a lot for answering his question.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. Good
Wonderful,
to see you.
perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. Please join us for our 4th webinar later in the month. And we will be having Dr. Christina Giavas from the Simon Fraser University talking about zoo archaeology in the Caribbean. So thanks again, Liz. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us on Facebook today.
Thank you so much. It was great to see you. Have a great afternoon.